Yes, I would. Thanks very much. There were a larger issue that related to climate change assessments that were under consideration in the Senate committee, and this is a sub-point of that, which basically points to a particular area of infrastructure to look at. So this isn't a climate assessment. This is a vulnerability assessment and to the activities that provide the transportation fuels that we rely on in the state for most of the vehicles in the state. And so it's a step back to look at the vulnerabilities of that infrastructure system. It is not a climate assessment in the sense that the larger, and it was connected, I was there, the discussion related to a number of other related proposals by other agencies that were looking at climate assessments. I would draw a distinction for this one. I would say this one is very much like what we did for the electric utility industry, where we look forward at the problems that we could expect to encounter as a result of the changes that have happened because of climate change.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. We can vote now.
Bloom?
Aye.
Gordon?
Aye.
Obernolte?
Aye.
Patterson?
No.
Williams?
Aye.
It's 4-1.
Thank you. Please proceed on the
So I'll run, we have
one.
budget proposal number 1, which is the augmentation to the positions that we have for the Energy Conservation and Assistance Act, the ECA program, which I'll call ECA from here on in. And the request is for 6 permanent and 2 5-year limited term positions from the ECA fund to support 2 of our ECA programs. The first one is for ECA Ed and ECA GGRS. The GGRF was the program which was funded last year and proposed to be funded this year with Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund programs. And that's for 4 permanent positions to fund the loans from application review through project installation and completion. These are zero-interest loans to local educational agencies, which includes K-12 districts, charter schools, county offices of education, and state special schools and community college districts. The second part of this budget request is for a complementary program. And you heard a little bit about the activities that are going on by the Conservation Corps. And this is an assistance program that helps schools assess what are the best and most cost-effective needs of addressing their energy efficiency needs. And so it's technical assistance and energy audits. And it's a very valuable and well-used program. And this is for 2 permanent positions and 5 two-year limited term positions for that particular program. You may wonder why limited term positions for that program, and the fact of the matter is that we're doing a big lump of work doing these assessments on schools, and we expect the work to decline as these audits get completed. So we are only asking for limited term positions for that purpose.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, is there public comment on this item? I think we can move to a motion and a vote, please.
I'll move the item.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Bloom?
Aye.
Gordon?
Aye.
Obernolte?
Aye.
Patterson?
Aye.
Williams?
Aye.
It's 5-0.
Thank you. Issue number 2.
Okay, thank you. This BCP is for 15 permanent positions to support the Alternative and Renewable Fuel and Vehicle Technology Program, and this is to augment the staffing resources that we already have. Let me first describe the program a little bit, because this is not a cookie-cutter, rebate-oriented type of program. What this program does is it invests in innovation. It invests in innovation for advanced and alternative vehicles and fuels, and we have a portfolio of very diverse programs that we go through solicitation and reward process. And the categories that we serve in this program include low-carbon biofuel production and supply, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, hydrogen refueling infrastructure, natural gas fueling infrastructure and vehicles, medium and heavy-duty advanced vehicle demonstrations, and a manufacturing of alternative fuel vehicles components, as well as some other programs. Now, here's the problem. Every year we receive about $100 million to administer in this program and award. The projects are multi-year projects, often taking 3 or 4 years to follow through to their completion. So there is a accumulated workload between getting the new funds every year out the door and keeping up and monitoring with the projects that are underway. And we have not yet reached equilibrium. At a certain point we will, but we have not reached equilibrium. We've been ramping up for some time. So we have a small staff working with all of these functions, putting new money out the door, selecting appropriate projects, working with our advisory committee, and then also overseeing the projects that are already funded. The biggest complaint that I hear about this program is we're slow on getting the funds out. We want to get the funds out, put them to work, both because we want to see the alternative and advanced vehicles and fuels out there, and also this is for businesses that want to develop and participate in our clean economy. The second motivation for this proposal is oversight of the existing funds. We are far below the aggressiveness and thoroughness that I'd like to see us monitoring the projects that are underway through completion. So we're cutting corners and doing a rather superficial version of Project Monitor. So we are coming to you today and asking for additional resources so we can both expedite put these funds to work, but also make sure that the funds, once they are awarded, are aggressively and accurately monitored to make sure we get the projects finished on time. And I ask for your support for that.
Thank you. The staff report lays out 3 major milestones that are contained in the action plan. Can you give us a sense of where we are with respect to the milestones, one of which is supposed to be achieved this year?
I'm sorry, let me turn to that page.
That's page 32. 34.
34.
Okay, these are on the ZEV plan. I'm sorry, thanks for that. I don't have specific metrics. We are working on the ZEV action plan. We have several of our existing positions working on that. We have an infrastructure plan that we've developed through the program for infrastructure charging. And essentially, our progress in zero-emission vehicle includes both charging infrastructure as well as hydrogen fueling stations. We've expended $92 million to date. We've funded 49 stations. We should have 39 stations in 2015 that are operational, 10 more in 2016 to meet the expected introduction of the hydrogen zero-emission vehicles. And that's pretty much where we stand. The main thresholds for the program are still in the future, so we're working on the programs to support those.
Well, I'd appreciate getting information back on what the interim milestones are for achieving the 2020 and beyond goals.
Okay, I'll be happy to provide that to the committee.
It's, I think, pretty important to know that with the funding level that we have here, that we're on the pathway to achieving the results that are planned.
I'll be happy to do that. Also, draw to your attention, we do an annual report to the legislature, which is provided, that has the data in there as well. But I will be happy to cull this particular one out and bring it to the committee.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other questions? Public comment? We have a recommendation on this item to approve as budgeted.
I'd like to move this item.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Bloom.
Aye.
Gordon. Obernolte. Patterson. Williams. It's 4-0.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Parks and Recreation is next. Welcome. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Lisa Mongan. I'm the Acting Director for the California State Parks Department. Maybe before we go into the item, it might be helpful to provide just a little background and context regarding the budget that's being presented for your consideration this year. Governor's budget released on January 9th included a very strong statement about this administration's commitment to strengthening the State Parks Department, including the state park system. That includes broadening its relevance to a broader, more diverse group of Californians, strengthening our fiscal accountability and our fiscal tracking systems, along with modernizing many of our systems. As your agenda notes, there was a Parks Forward Commission that was convened. The Parks Forward report was released final on January 30th of this past of 2015, and the Parks Forward Commission adopted that final report in the first week of February. The budget presented before you today is a total of $570 million. Of that amount, $116 million is general fund. Unless there's any questions, I'll move into your item for discussion, which is the item for discussion is an augmentation to our base budget of SPRF. SPRF is the State Parks and Recreation Fund. It is our primary special fund source. So it's not a general fund augmentation. But what I think it's important to note is that over the last several years, we have been spending down a rather robust fund balance from this fund. And so as the governor's budget notes, this is one more time of doing that. But I think it's important to know within the context of this request is that the administration's also established a transformation team to take a very detailed look at the department structure. There's various key initiatives, and I think Mr. Zaley has been put in place to lead this team. We expect that this is a 2-year focused effort. We don't intend to go dark on you for these 2 years. We will be continuing to have dialogue with you and roll out many of these initiatives and solutions to many of these challenges as we identify them. So this particular base augmentation includes $16.8 million just to maintain the current level of service. As your agenda notes, there's $1.2 million that would be included to finally open, and we're very excited about that, the LA Historic Park. We expect that to open in fall of 2015 of this year. There's also noted in your agenda the Hearst Castle ground transportation funding. This is $1 million. It does a couple of things. As noted in your agenda, previously we had funded this activity through the use of reimbursements. And through our review of the department, we noted that it was more appropriately to be funded through the SPRF program. So we're taking a program that had previously been funded through reimbursements. It'll now be funded through SPRF. And included in that is an increase for increased fuel costs. We are also opening a new Donner Memorial Visitor Center. That's $424,000. And then your agenda also notes, you call them sub-account project shifts. These are programs that we were able to fund through funds that you made available through AB 1478 for revenue generation projects. And this would build them into our base funding in the SPRF program. And there are 3. We created a new tour of the Hearst Castle project. We also took over a lodging program that had previously been run by a concessionaire. And we also enhanced some RV hookups out at Silver Strand. And with that, I'll take any of your questions or comments.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Does Department of Finance or LAO have any comments? Looks like none. Last year we had some issues regarding, or had some discussions regarding the restrooms in various parts around the system. Has there been any specific progress on that kind of infrastructure improvement?
In terms of, I guess maybe I would answer your question twofold. I think there were a couple of things that were being asked of us. One is just...
I'm sorry, I'm just, recalling it now as I'm sitting
Well, kind of in the chair that I sit, there's two things that I think about in terms of restrooms. One is in terms of being open and being available and being clean timely for our visitors. So there's that. And then there also, I think then there was also another question about whether we should be doing some updates for some of our facilities. I think what I would say about that is that one of the key initiatives of the transformation team is called service-based budgeting. Right now, quite candidly, I think the way that we react to these things is very haphazard, and we kind of go into this reactionary mode. So when you ask what are we doing, I think we're trying to be very vigilant about that. But as with any budget, whether it be your home budget, the state budget, or this department's budget, it's always a matter of prioritization. And I think right now we have not been ideally positioned to make data-driven prioritization decisions. And one of the key initiatives of this the transformation team is a service-based budgeting model that would allow us to have the kind of data to be able to respond and I think be more nimble on those types of things.
Are we any closer now to understanding the individual park budget costs as components of the whole?
So this past month, we released our second annual park unit costing budget, or our park unit costing report. Several years ago, when we were going through the difficult discussions of potentially closing 70 parks, we were very fortunate as a state that we had so many individuals that came out and wanted to help us. And they asked a very reasonable question of us at that time. And that question was, how much do you, State of California, spend to operate these individual parks? We really struggled as an agency to answer that question in a really meaningful manner. And it was through those discussions that I think that there was a more invigorated discussion with you and the legislature about the need to provide that kind of information. Last year, January 2014, was the first time that we developed a report that did that. What the report does is it looks back and it tells you exactly what the expenditures were for each of the individual parks. We took that report very seriously. It's not something that that we as a department went off and did on our own. We worked very closely with the Department of Finance. We took a very rigorous review and approach at it. We released our second report last month. But having said that, in the time that I've been sitting in this chair, I think there are some questions that the public, and including yourselves as decision makers, have of us that that report does not answer. And I think it's that service-based budgeting effort through the transformation team that will allow us to kind of engage with you in a more meaningful manner. And that gets to more of kind of what do you spend on individual functions? How much do you spend and how do you track, State Parks Department, the fundings that you allocate for the management of natural resources? How much do you fund, how much do you spend on maintenance, those types of things? That's what that report does not get to.
I appreciate the fact that you're characterizing this as information that's important for us to have, which I think it obviously is, but I think it's critical information for you to have to perform your management function of these individual units, so you understand what the underlying expenses are, given that virtually every asset that you have is unique in character and likely cost.
Absolutely. And that's why you hear us talk so much about the importance of data-driven decision-making. And I think that that's something, this additional information helps with that. Something else along those lines that I think is really important, that we historically as a department have not gotten our allocation. So while you may agree to a budget that takes effect on July 1st, we're not getting our allocations out to the field. The individuals who are managing all of the individual park units, oftentimes not until the fall. Last year was the first time that we were able to get their baseline budget out to them beginning in July. We're very excited about that. This year we're taking additional steps to get even more of those like sub-account and these other various revenue generation, those other pots of money that you made available out to the field even sooner. And it's all about the importance of planning. We should be planning right now for our summer and our fall and our spring next year. And those are those internal processes that we are working on that we need to strengthen. So I think that we've done some great things, but we can do more and we can do better.
Thank you. We have Mr. Williams and Mr. Obernolte.
I just had a question about the Hearst Castle shuttle I don't represent San Luis Obispo County, but I'm not that far away. If the costs are going up because of the need for increased trips, is that, and so it's fuel costs essentially?
It's primarily fuel costs, but a bulk of this request is that it's changing the way we're funding it. Previously, this had been funded through reimbursements, meaning that it was just fees that were collected there at the individual park and held at the individual park. It's instead, those fees are more appropriately placed in this SPURF account. So we're really kind of, the bulk of this augmentation is really to just take that funding that had been collected and kept in this reimbursement account and more appropriately reflecting it in this state special fund.
But it is also going up the cost as you go.
Yes, for fuel.
Have you looked at, it would obviously be a great way to highlight the state living by its own values, to also look at alternatives. I mean, from my perspective, I would be willing to spend more in capital costs if that reduced the growth of your fuel costs by investing in any one number of a couple alternative fuel.
And some greener solutions.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's electric, natural gas, depends on the size of the bus or, you know, what the particulars are, what would be most cost effective. But just looking at those others, I just rather spend more money on the front end rather than spend this money every year.
I appreciate that. That's being more environmentally friendly and coming up with some of these alternative solutions is something that we're talking about throughout the system. And actually, it's one of the things that we're talking about kind of going forward as part of the transformation team effort in terms of looking at deferred maintenance. And that as we, while on one hand we have a wonderful opportunity because we have much to fix throughout the system, but we should be thoughtful about how we do that. And we have a lot of alternatives available to us today that we did not when we created a lot of these projects.
Mr. Obernolte.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question about the state auditor's report that had some critical things to say about your department's flaws in your budget allocation process. And as you know, that was released in the fall of 2013, and then there was an update in the fall of 2014, and they had 16 recommendations for you to fix those flaws. Can you give us a progress update on how many of those that you've addressed?
You know, it's kind of interesting. We're changing so much. We're kind of, as you can tell, this is not a business as usual year, and the next few years, the next several years will not be for this department. One illustrative example maybe I can share that they highlighted, there was some concern raised about our hiring practices, that somehow there was kind of a disconnect. We had a group of folks that sat in and made some determinations about hiring practices, and I think the auditor expressed some concerns that there wasn't enough communication either downward within the organization or upwards towards the executive team or the director to make sure that the hiring practices were consistent with kind of the vision of leadership. Since that time, we've actually gotten rid of that EPRC program. We actually have a much tighter control over our positions in this interim period. One of the things that we've done is we've gone through and swept our vacant positions, our unfunded vacant positions. Back in 2012, this governor released an executive order requiring that the Department of Finance go through and look at all state agencies and determine which of those state agencies had unfunded vacant positions. We were kind of uniquely positioned at that time because we were in the middle of talking about 70 park closures. So at that time, the Department of Finance swept a portion of our vacant unfunded positions, but not all of our unfunded positions. So they left us with a balance. That was one of the things that the state auditor talked about. Over the summer, we've worked with the Department of Finance. We've swept the balance of those. And they've left us a pool of 100 positions, 100 vacant positions to manage to. So because of that, we no longer have that committee that the auditor talked about, and instead we have this very rigorous process where each individual hire at this point, there's a form that needs to be filled out. There's multiple layers of review to make sure that there is sufficient funding for each individual hire. And then myself or my designee actually goes through and signs off on those hires. So I think with regard to that illustrative example, I think probably if you looked on the auditor's website, it might say that I don't know exactly what the wording is, but that somehow that we have not complied, but I think we've instead done something very differently. You know, through this effort, I expect this is not something that's just going to be done. This transformation of this department is not going to be something that's just done internally within the department. I expect at the end of this effort, the structure of our budget may look differently, which is something that will be presented to you and discussed with you at length. I also expect that the organization of the department is going to look very different, and that will be something that will be presented to you. So I think we take very seriously a lot of their findings, and it wasn't just them, but it's just our internal holistic view of ourselves, and we recognize that we need to take some serious steps and that this isn't, you know, business as usual. And so every time I get before you, you'll hear us talking about these types of things. This is not, for us, when we look at this budget augmentation that we have before you, this is really not kind of an ongoing way we should be funding the state park system. But that's why we have to have kind of this all-hands-on-deck effort to really take a look at how we're doing all of these things.
Well, thank you very much for those comments. And just being equally forthright, I found that the one-year update for the auditor to be a little bit alarming. And I think that self-criticism is very important, and that when an auditor comes in and criticizes our organization, that we really need to go through and either decide to address the concerns or come up with a reason why we don't think those concerns are valid. And I would really like to see your department finish that process and implement the reforms that are recommended by the auditor before we vote on a budget augmentation. That's a very difficult decision for me, and although I support who you are and what you do, would really like to see you take that step.
I appreciate that. And I guess I would just add that everything that we're doing is keeping that in mind and making sure that we're complying with kind of the Department of Finance and all of the control agencies, and including the auditor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a public comment? Yes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, David Jones, on behalf of the town of Truckee, we'd like to applaud the department for its strong efforts with Donner Memorial Park. This augmentation is the last mile as far as getting the facility open and running. We're really looking forward to having the facility going. You've invested $9.6 million, so this $400,000 is going to be very critical as far as getting this open in Mr. Dolly's district and Mr. Gaines' district. So we'd applaud the staff recommendation and urge an aye vote on this measure. Thank you.
Good morning. Tracy Verdo Torres with the California State Parks Foundation. Want to just echo the comments in support of the Donner Memorial and also speak on behalf of our colleagues, the Sierra State Parks Foundation, who are actually raising money right now to provide staff funding in the gap time between getting the museum open and having this augmentation in place. I did want to also support the LA State Historic Park. We've been working in partnership with the department on that, excuse me, for years. But wanted to raise one thing in general about the State Park and Recreation Fund. And I think if you look at the State Park and Recreation Fund level in 13-14 compared to the last couple of years, it's a $40 million difference. So 3 years ago, the State Park and Recreation Fund that was approved by the legislature was about $137 million. And this year, you're considering an augmentation, but you're considering a funding level $176 million. And there's a couple of takeaways from that. Number one, the good news is that reflects revenue that the department is earning. So they're earning it, and you are giving them the ability to spend it, and that is a good thing. But on behalf of the State Parks Foundation, we just want to flag an issue that is at the core, I think, of how we approach funding for state parks. And that is, we do not want to create an unrealistic expectation and over-reliance on earned revenue for a department that still needs to have a consistent general fund support. I know that's not exactly the issue before you today. We support the augmentation and we support the department's efforts to become more self-generating in revenue, but there are limits to that, and there is a need to have sort of a master plan on enterprise or a more strategic approach that might look at funding from an earned revenue perspective statewide. We've been working with the Parks Forward Commission. That was a consistent area of recommendation we made to look at enterprise, number one, from earning visitor value, and number two, from earning money. And so that's just as this committee today and in the future thinks about how to approve the department and to support them in earned revenue, we don't want to lose sight of the fact that they need to have a consistent general fund appropriation as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have a motion on this item?
Move the item.
Second.
Bloom.
Aye.
Gordon. Obernolte.
No.
Patterson. Williams.
Aye.
3 to 1, that's out.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. Delta Stewardship Council.